You know, while I'm doing that, one of the most interesting things that we see as we run across the country teaching this fantastic method is people continually say, I can't draw a straight line. I don't have the talent, Bob, to do what you're doing. That's baloney. Talent is a pursued interest. In other words, anything that you're willing to practice, you can do. And this is no exception.
Hello, my friends. So, new setup, trying some new stuff. This video is part experiment, part tutorial. But what's most important is that we focus on the little clip I hope you just saw. If it's not a clip, then it's a quote, which is less fun than a clip. But whatever. The point is, I really do believe that quote. And Bob Ross, I've talked about this before, Julia Child, those sort of PBS geniuses of my youth, really taught us that anything that we want to do, we can do better if we're interested in putting in the work. And so Bob Ross's quote about talent being nothing more than applied or pursued interest, I think is really, really true. Now, of course, there's variations on that. There's natural gifts people have. I like to sing. Does that mean that I'm going to be Adele? No. But there are things I can do to improve my voice, to learn breath control, etc., and I can become a better singer. I won't necessarily become Adele, but I can become me, as a singer if I want to. There are people who maybe the best they can hope for is a decently on-key happy birthday. Most of us, though, can find something somewhere that's kind of satisfying. So I do think that talent is kind of a blend of applied interest or pursued interest and gift. But for the most part, applied interest or pursued interest is really going to take us as far as we can go, barring whatever's out of our control. And that's just one of the realities of life, right? There's stuff that's out of our control. There's stuff that's in our control. We control what we can, and practicing and applying that interest is how we do it. And so that's what this video is about. Now, let's talk a little bit about learning how to read tarot. There are now, if you're starting out, a whole lot of ways you can learn, including videos like this, classes online, classes in person. There's really been kind of an explosion of opportunities and methods of reading cards and learning how to do it and getting feedback. There's discussion groups, etc. But for most folks that I know, and probably for most folks who are starting out, even with the opportunities, really the first thing that we do is we pick up a book of tarot meanings. And it's interesting because in the past 100 years, really, they haven't changed all that much. And I think that Waite, Arthur Edward Waite, kind of set the tone with the pictorial key. And he gave us a structure that was sort of introduction, history, questionable history in his case, an explanation of the sort of metaphysics or cosmology of the tarot or whatever sort of predominating theories surrounded it at that point, and then an in-depth exploration of the cards. And so he did that, and then Eden Gray came along, and I think kind of set the wheels in motion, certainly in the United States, for the template that we know today. And then Rachel Pollock took that up with 78 Degrees of Wisdom. And there's a new edition of this, but you get it. And this follows the same structure, which is here's an introduction, here's my history, here's the history as we understand it now, here's the structure, here's what the cards mean, here are some examples. And then today, we're still working in that structure. So, for example, we can look at Kitchen Table Tarot. It does a very similar thing. Here's an introduction. Here's the history as we know it. Here are the card meanings. Here are some samples. The thing that has principally changed over time is the way that we look at the cards, because what we want from tarot has evolved over time. And if you start from the very beginning with the French sort of pre-Golden Dawn school, into the Waite Golden Dawn school, what you got was a movement towards the esoteric, a movement towards magic and religion. And then Eden Gray kind of brought that into life, but really kept it grounded in Waite's history. Rachel Pollock took that further. And then with Kitchen Table Tarot, we're sort of taking it a little bit back to sort of pre-Golden Dawn, pre-French esotericism, and into the kinds of things that we care about a lot today. So there's like a very cyclical thing, but like the structure is the same. And what I think, is interesting, like if we look at the way that we talk about cards, in Rachel Pollock to Melissa Chinova, like it hasn't changed all that much. It's just sort of the way we're talking about them. Now I'm just going to give you a sample because there's a lot of pages on these, but like, suppose we look at the devil. So Rachel Pollock says of the devil, after a whole lot of brilliant stuff, the devil signifies being the slave of your desires rather than acting the way you think is best. It can mean a controlling obsession, particularly a sexual one, where the person feels drawn to commit acts he or she finds morally repugnant. The extreme example is the sex criminal. On a more common level, many men and women find themselves powerfully attracted to people they actively dislike. The feeling of helplessness and shame which results from giving in to these desires belongs to the devil. So that was Rachel Pollock writing, gosh, when was this? I think in the late 70s. 1980. So today, a couple years ago, we have Melissa Chinova's Kitchen Table Tarot, and it's similar. I won't read everything, of course, because in the Trumps, they're obviously going to say a lot. Sorry, I'm just looking for what I should have marked and did not. This card is about chaining yourself to those things that pull you down. We turn ourselves inside out and pick and pick and pick until our insides are a bloody mess. I wonder why we allow that. When does it become okay to verbally and emotionally abuse ourselves? In what context and in what fashion does saying horrible things to ourselves become permissible and even expected? I think it comes down to two things, fear and doubt. Fear that we're not as good as everyone else, and doubt that allows that fear to trickle in. If we are confident and strong, what someone else says about us bounces away. So this reflects kind of a more modern, introspective, self kind of shadow aspect, but it's very similar to what Rachel Pollock wrote in 1980. And I think, we're still kind of looking at the cards in the way that we always have. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just the way that we do it. Now, when we do that, when we sort of learn tarot that way, what we get is a lot of great information about each card. We get a lot of information about the symbols. We get a lot of information about the history and the mythology that grew up around the art that we have today. As a reader, though, it is a difficult transition from taking that information that you internalize, maybe actively memorize, and bringing it into readings and making it work for you. So what this video is about is that most, and not all, you know what I mean? I'm just sort of focusing on like the broad way most people have learned. That is changing. But, we have these great books, and that's how we learned. But how do you take that and make it into readings? How do you really grow that into the kinds of readings that you're going to feel really proud of and really, really helpful? How do you weave things together? So there's a lot of questions we talk about like, how do you create narrative? I've done videos on this. How do you weave things together? How do you make the cards make sense in context, etc.? So what I have for you are some things to think about and try. And it's not everything I could suggest. In fact, I think this is probably going to be the basis of a class or a book that might be sort of, slowly working its way. But, yes. So I'm not giving away the store is essentially what I'm saying, but I'm going to give you some stuff to think about. So when it comes to these books, no matter which ones you've read and which ones you love, and no matter how great they are, that's where you're coming from. It's not where you're going. The card meaning is just the beginning. That is a necessarily concise and, I don't know the word I'm looking for. It's a necessarily individual description of a card and its meaning out of any context, aside from the context that it's a tarot card in the tarot deck. Now, as a reader, that's where we start. That's the starting pistol is the card meaning. Whatever meaning we've assigned to it, whatever we've learned, absorbed, however we did it, whatever system we're using, whether it's Thoth, whether it's Rider-Waite-Smith, whether it's whatever, Dreams of Gaia or Wild Unknown, all of those are systems, and the system itself is the foundation that we sit on. It's the chair that keeps us from falling, right? But that is the starting place. So the card meaning is only where we begin. I've sort of developed this habit of quoting Camellia Elias's quote that the cards don't mean anything. And I really do believe that, but it's kind of a misleading thing to say. And I think that in working through this and thinking about it and talking about it, what I really mean when I appropriate that phrase is what I just said, that the meaning of the card is where you're starting, but you have a long way to go to make a reading. It's not just saying that the Eight of Wands means speed, putting your work out there, etc. Right? So what do we do and how do we know? Well, I'm checking my trusty notes because I tried doing this video and winging it, and it did not go well. So here's what's what. So if the card meaning is where we're starting, not where we're going, then we have to accept the fact, we don't have to accept anything, but it helps to accept the theory that the meaning evolves and stretches based on what you're reading about. I give this example all the time because it's one that I remember very vividly, and it was very arrogant of me to do it. I did a reading for the Free Tarot Network 100 years ago. I must have been 19 or 20, 21, probably 21. And someone wanted to know about their love life, and I drew the Eight of Wands, and I said, your love life doesn't matter. You need to work on your creative life. And they were like, I don't have a creative life. And I was like, but you must find it because the cards have given you a wand, the Eight of Wands. You have to go out and pursue your work, and your love life is meaningless. That, I've said many times, comes from a place both of arrogance, assuming I know better than whoever I'm reading for and whatever they asked me, but also of fear, I think, of being afraid to, or not even afraid to, but afraid that we don't know how to make the connection. It's a little bit of laziness, because we're afraid to kind of settle in and do the work. And so we say, this means this. The meaning of this card is pursuing work, creative work. It's fire, it's energy. Eights are work. It's all these arrows flying through space. You got to go submit your novel. That's not a reading, that's a recitation of a card meaning from a book that we admire and that really helps us. What we now have to do, though, is make that make sense in a number of situations. The Eight of Wands is not about pursuing your work, your creative work, or doing it with speed. That is the metaphor, that's the beginning, that's the starting point, that's the once upon a time for whatever the reading is. If the question is about marriage or relationships, I start with speed, fire, and passion and creativity, but then I have to make it make sense in the context. And you hear, if you watch my channel at all, you know that I am a fucking, I can't even remember the word, a broken record about context, because it really is everything for us. And I think that how you go from being a good reader to a better reader is context, context, context. And so the first thing I think you want to do when you're feeling confident and you know your keywords, you know your phrases, you feel like you have that, you've got the book down, is that you then have to sit with the cards and those basic concepts, that starting point, and look at it in a wide array of contexts, of questions. And so if the Eight of Wands is about fire and passion and speed and energy and creativity and going fast and getting stuff out there, how does that apply to dieting? How does that apply to a relationship? How does that apply to money, to a job search, to a legal case, to anything, And so I think that's a gap in a lot of readers' experience is the time spent after you learn the basic keywords and phrases, moving into how does that keyword and phrase morph as I go from card to card? and I'm sorry, as I go from theme to theme. So it really, really, really is about applying the basic concept to as many different situations as you can think of and making it make sense in that context, because every card can apply to every situation if you're open to it. And you should be, because that's how you start to feel more confident in your reading. And so practicing that way, I think, is really key. You know, don't do a daily draw of a different card every day. Do a daily draw of the same card every day for a week. Take the Eight of Wands, draw it on Monday or whatever card, and then every day that week say, where did this card show up in my life today? And how can I think of specific ways and reasons that this card showed itself today? And you do that for 7 days, you know, and in that way you start to find all of these different associations that, yes, have to do with speed and creativity and getting your stuff out there and pushing and hustling, but that are about work and money and friendship and love and sex and food and all the things that we care about. So that's really the big, big, big thing. And it's probably not going to be revolutionary if you've watched my channel before, because I've talked about that many, many times. But I really, really think fundamentally, if you want to be a great reader, that is the key thing you can do to practice. And however you practice it. But remember, talent is applied or pursued interest. And if you're really interested in getting better, then you do that kind of work that sort of takes those keywords and phrases from the books that you've read and that you've absorbed, and that you spray paint life all over them. Or rather, you spray paint the card all over life in order to figure out how they play together. And the same thing happens when cards are in relationship to one another. So the Eight of Wands may mean X, Y, and Z in the context of a relationship, but it may also mean X, Y, and Z something else in the context of a relationship and the Two of Cups, as opposed to death. You know? So just like thinking off the top of my head, if it's a question about like what's going to happen in the next year in my relationship. Now, I don't really do year-long predictions because I think that's too long, but just for the sake of argument. And I get the Eight of Wands, the Two of Cups, and death. Then things are going to move really fast. I'm going to feel really attracted to this person, and then fizzles out. But if it's the Eight of Wands, the Two of Cups, and the Lovers, then things are going to move really fast. I'm going to feel really attracted to this person, and then I'm going to marry them. You know, so the way that the cards play together is another thing. And so that's then the next thing to practice, is not just the cards in context to 100 different life situations, but the cards in context to 100 different life situations and each other. And so then you spend 6 weeks doing the weekly draw where you use one card 7 days to see how it appeared in your life. Then you go and you do the same thing and you pull 3 cards, but you keep the first 2 and you change the third one and see how the relationships change. And you do that for 6 weeks so that you have the Eight of Wands, the Two of Cups, and then for 7 days a different third card. And you experiment and you explore how that works in your life, you know, and so you see the cards dance together and you see how they impact one another and how not just the cards changed, but what happened that day changed. And you don't just look for the one thing that it means that day. You look for everything that it meant that day, because what you're doing when you do that is you're finding the life in the cards, and that's what they're about. That's what we're reading about. You know, reading really is not about reciting meanings. It's about figuring out life and applying those meanings to an array of circumstances and situations. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity with things like daily draws to take it beyond just like, here's a card. The energy I'm working with today is the Eight of Wands. I need to be fast and creative. Like, fine. Okay, maybe. But like, there's a real opportunity to like say, oh, I needed to be fast and creative in that meeting when I forgot my notes. I needed to really improvise the solution. I needed to be fast and creative when I was late for work. I needed to be fast and creative when the kids were looking for dinner and I didn't know what to make and we didn't have anything good in the fridge. Do you know, so like, you don't just try to find the one way that card manifested during the day. It's every way that it possibly could have. And the same thing for the 3-card version. You know, but in that case, you're looking at similar vibes with the third card changing, but you look for every way that 3-card combo played out in the course of your day. And you're not going to remember all of them, but the right things will pop into your head at the right time if you're listening, if you're engaged. And so that kind of takes me to the next thing, which is like, you got to get out of the way of the cards. Like, don't impose meaning on them. Listen to them. Once you've practiced and you're doing the work and you're internalizing all of these things, just listen to them. Don't tell them what they mean. Ask them what they mean, and then step back and just sort of let the experience hit you. You know, just to go back to the example of 8 of Wands, 2 of Cups, and Death. The reading that I did just now, that I very quickly improvised, was an imposition of my own card meanings on them, absent the context of a question and a person and any life history I know about them. But there's a lot of different ways those cards could dance together. And if you just sort of sit with them quietly and let them talk, some things are going to start to happen. And when tarot teachers or writers or mentors or coaches or whatever say things like this, the student, and I know because I have done this, puts a lot of pressure on themselves to like get it, to like make it happen. It's not about putting any pressure on yourself. If you draw 3 cards and you lay them out and you just sit with them for a little bit, one of them will start to get really loud. Maybe. Maybe not. Oftentimes, yes. One of them will just announce itself as more vibrant, more active, more powerful, whatever. It will start to demand your attention more than the others. Don't impose any meaning on that yet. Just allow it to happen. You know, okay, that devil card or that death card is like screaming today. He's like, listen to me. And then another card may be very, very faint. That 8 of Wands may be like, like I'm here. I don't know. What do I mean? And then the 2 of Cups may be like, I'm a person. I'm the actor, you know? Or it could be anything, but if you just sort of like a magic eye poster, just sort of sit with them. Oftentimes, if you relax into it, those things will start to happen, or relationships will start to develop. And so you'll see, oh, the 8 of Wands is shooting towards the death card, you know, and the death card is riding away from it. And you just start to sort of listen to those little things before you start imposing whatever you learned they mean. Sometimes those little things are going to happen and they're going to mean the world to the reading, and sometimes they're not. But the point is not to like demand speed, demand that they respond to you, but to actually respond to them the way that you might at a museum and enjoying a piece of art. You know, you don't go to see Rothko and demand that it mean something to you. It will mean something to you or not based on your experience and your life and the lighting that day and the mood you're in that day and whatever. You know, maybe it won't mean anything, maybe it will. But like the colors in the Rothko will start to vibrate in a way and you'll feel like, oh God, this feels like that time that I was at that bar and I was like totally into this guy and he was totally into me, and we like, you know, we never actually met, we never talked, but there was like heat there, and like he was with his friends and I was with mine, and like there's like this unquenched connection there that like maybe wasn't meant to be anything, but it was something that night. And like, oh God, that paint, the vibration of that painting really feels that way to me. You know what I mean? Like, approach a spread of cards in the same way you might approach a work of art and let it talk to you. That's your intuition. Now, how do you know that your intuition isn't just your imagination or BSing you or you're projecting? The card meanings help. They give you a bounding box. So if you're like looking at this spread of the 8 of Wands, 2 of Cups, and Death, and you're like, oh yeah, this reminds me of that time I went skinny dipping with Blake and we totally made out, you know, and then his mom caught us and, you know, she made out with me too. Like, how do you know that that means anything? Well, the 8 of Wands and the 2 of Cups and the Death card, like that doesn't vibe somehow. You know what I mean? So the meanings of the cards can rein you in when you start to get too far out there. You know, it's a way of bringing yourself in. It's a way of checking your math. And that's sort of the final thing I want to talk about is checking your math. So you listen to the cards, you let them dance and play together, you respond to them like a piece of art, and then you kind of come back down to earth, and you look at the cards, and you look at what you know about them and what you've learned, and you say, is that justifiable in any way? Has this sort of narrative or meaning or whatever that I've come up with have any relationship to my traditional meanings for the Eight of Wands, the Two of Cups, and Death? And maybe it's a stretch, but yeah, I can see that. That fits in with this. I can see that the speed and sexiness is that attraction that got us skinny dipping, and then the water is the Two of Cups, and Death is mom coming in and being like, what are you doing? But then she changes everything and changes her life, and she wants to join the fun. So she makes that with me too. So that does make sense. I can justify it. Prove it. You know what I mean? The same way your teacher would ask you to show your work or prove your thesis on a term paper or whatever metaphor you want to give it, go back and say, okay, is this contextually appropriate, or have I gone off the rails? And I think that that's a key too that really matters, particularly maybe for folks who really like to read intuitively without kind of thinking anything about structure. Can you justify your answer in any way that is reasonable? And that, a teacher would say, okay, I can see that argument. I don't think it needs to be like a thesis. You don't have to defend it or you're going to fail. But I think that it can help you ground your reading in something that feels right and that is provable given what you know about the cards. And so it kind of rings you back in. And so how do you do that? How do you get good at that? How do you play? Well, you get in the sandbox, you play. And so you could keep doing the kinds of daily draws that I talked about, or you could sit down. If you've ever watched Kelly from the Truth in Stories new deck, she has a video about how she works with, she doesn't do new deck spreads or interview spreads. She does an activity where she just lays out the cards in sets of 3 and does really quick responses to them to see how they work together. That's something that I would do just to play. You know what I mean? To sort of lay out a couple cards, lay out 3 cards, go through that process of letting them talk to you, listen to them, see who's talking louder, see who's maybe a little more retiring, and then come up with some kind of interpretation and then say, can I justify that based on what I know about the cards? And if you can't, great. Because that's the final thing, really, when you're learning anything, is making a safe space for you to fail and then to learn from that failure. And I think failure is such a loaded word, right? But if you're learning, you have to make a safe space for you to not achieve the goal so that you can figure out how you got there and maybe what you would do differently next time. And so, okay, this thing doesn't quite make sense. I have come up with this narrative and I look at what I know about the cards and there's really no way for me to justify it. Where did I go so wrong? Maybe I did just let my imagination take over, and I need to go back to the drawing board. That's okay. That's how you get good, is by practicing and playing. I was talking to a friend of mine. I don't know if I've ever told this story on this channel before, but a friend of mine is a writer, and we both one day were bitching about how we're not successful or as successful as we hoped we would be by this point in our lives. And she was talking to her sister, who is a scientist, teaches actually at Brown University, and I think. And this friend, my friend's sister, said, let me tell you how you think about failure in the lab. It's just data. It's just information. And it's how we know that we haven't gotten where we want to go yet. So if we're trying to, I don't think she works in infectious diseases, but let's say that they're trying to find a cure for a disease. Every failure is a step closer to getting where they want to go because they know that that one thing isn't going to work. So they've eliminated a possibility. If we can have that, if scientists can have that attitude about finding a cure for things, as tarot readers trying to improve our game when we're practicing, certainly we can allow ourselves to go completely off the rails because there's no danger there. If we're not doing a live paid reading for somebody, we have the opportunity to play and say, okay, how could this be? How else could it be? Can I justify this? No, gee, why not? Let me try again. You know, and I think that that really ultimately, no matter what you agree with, if you think everything I've said is BS, or if you really do think the cards have rigid meanings and that's that, you only get better by getting in the sandbox and playing and playing and playing and playing and making a mess and getting dirty and understanding how things work. You learn to put a clock back together by taking it apart and not being able to do it until finally you can. You know, and if you think about how we work these days, how you've learned probably anything that you care about, oftentimes you were interested enough to go find out about it. You know, if you need to do an oil change, if you want to make a pizza or you want to make soup, what did you do? You went and found a recipe. You went and found a YouTube video. You cared enough to find the solution and you got there. Now, a recipe that you're making one night probably isn't something you're going to retain. So you have a job aid, which is the recipe. But with tarot, which is something you want to be really good at, you keep making the recipe over and over and over again. And you keep trying all the variations. And that just comes to live inside you. The same thing would be if you were making that soup every night. You would eventually not need to look at the recipe. But you can't just memorize it. You can't just sit there and say, okay, I need 1 cup of water, 2 cups of clove. 2 cups of clove would be a lot of anything. But you know what I mean? Okay, I do this and this. Like, you can do that. But then, like, when push comes to shove, in a month from now, when you go to make the recipe, most of that information will have gone away because it wasn't relevant, you know, and you didn't practice it all the time. Short-term memory and long-term memory are very sneaky things. And really what scientists know about how we learn and how we retain information is that we only really learn and retain what is valuable to us and what we care about. So it's like, I care enough about this to retain it. And if I don't care enough about it, then I'm going to forget it. Moving something from short-term into long-term memory is really an act of wanting it to be there or being afraid that it won't be there. That's really the key to learning anything. And so if you want to get really good at something, you have to do it a lot. You have to care enough to do it a lot so that it becomes part of the internalized mechanism of who you are. So that if you take a year off after 4 years of practicing, it's like riding a bike. And in fact, you may find that you've actually learned more without reading. And I guess that's the final thing I would say is take breaks. You know, it's okay to rest. It's okay to take a break. You have to. You want to internalize what you're doing. If you do it every day, all day, you're going to burn out. And that's not good. I've been there. You know, that's when people plateau. They stop getting better because they just haven't given themselves time to internalize everything that they've learned. And you have to. You have to let this stuff proof. It's like bread. You need all those little enzymes to come to life and start to fizzle and grow inside you. And that's another big thing. So anyway, this is kind of like a really huge overview of like things that I know to be true about getting good at something, particularly reading cards. And I do hope this helps. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. I mean, I have a lot more to say, but I think that it is sort of percolating something that, again, might become something larger than just a 30-minute video. So I hope that this helps. Be good. Practice. Get in the dirt. Make a mess. It's okay to fail. It's okay to be wrong. Make space for yourself to do that so that you build your confidence. And it's not just like, oh, shit, I was wrong. Oh, shit, here's how I got there. Oh, I know not to do that way this time. You know what I mean? So that's that. Be good. Take care. And we'll talk soon.